And you're watching Daybreak on Citizen Television. Thank you for staying with us. We now get to our discussion and focusing on foreign policy and diplomacy, given the deployment of the Kenya Defense Forces in the Democratic Republic of the Congo to supplement efforts by UN's biggest mission in the world, MONUSCO, in the stabilization efforts in the DRC. And coming just days after former President Uhuru Kenyatta led peace efforts to reconcile warring parties in Ethiopia, in South Africa, that is, later followed up talks in Nairobi, and later his touring of eastern parts of the Democratic Republic of the Congo for the stabilization mission, in what analysts believe is placing Kenya strategically in seeking its interests and diplomatic and military leverage. On my media tribe this morning is Dr. Mumonzao. He is security and strategic advisor, consultant on matters foreign policy and diplomacy. Good morning, Dr. Thank you for your time and company. Professor Macharia Munene is also a commentator on foreign policy and diplomacy, also a historian and lecturer on international relations and diplomacy. Thank you, Prof, and good morning. Thanks for your time.
Good morning.
Asante sana. Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you so much, gentlemen, once again for creating time for us. Of course, you're going to delve deeper into the situation in the continent, the role we have played as a continent and even as Kenya, and what this means for us. But I'd like just to begin by your quick assessment. If you look at where we are at, just a summary, what words would you use to describe that? Let me begin with you, Prof.
That's right. Kenya is at a good place. Kenya has had a long history of what we call peace diplomacy, the good diplomacy of conflict management in the region. So our diplomacy of regional conflict management, our philosophy of good neighborliness, economic diplomacy, diaspora kind of diplomacy, and the idea of being a regional leader and a good leader in the continent, a good example for the continent, is really coming out well. We had a successful transition here. A stable, post-election outlook that the rest of the world has really admired, and a very good outlook with President Uhuru, former President Uhuru, taking up the task that our dear President, President William Ruto, wanted him to play, and it's turning out to be a very good thing for our country. Every country, of course, is out there to enhance its interests. But, of course, interests, international interaction, international discourse is about competition sometimes, cooperation, but sometimes it can be conflictual. And Kenya is adopting a philosophy where it should be less conflictual within healthy competition and better cooperation outcomes for the country and for the region.
All right.
Yeah.
What about you, Professor Macharia? For a very long time, Africa was described as a dark continent marred with several challenges, one of them including what you're discussing this morning, conflict. Is that a narrative likely to change, going by what has been happening, efforts to seek diplomacy and peace building?
There are likely to be some changes. And those who described Africa as a dark continent, dark or whatever, are themselves in the dark. The world is going through some changes, realignment everywhere. And it is in the interests of the African countries to be in line with those realignments, to ensure that they are not made to align somewhere. They decide where. And that requires quite serious thinking in terms of what may be perceived to be national interest of each country. And Kenya being one of them, it is in its interest to decide for itself how to align or to create a niche for itself. It would be terrible if Kenya was to wait for some other powers, mostly extracontinental forces, to tell Kenya what its interests are. So it is for Kenya to decide what those interests are. And I think at present, it is going through some evaluation. And that evaluation will help to position it vis-a-vis what is going on within the region, in the continent, and globally. So that reassignment or review is very healthy for the country.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. You mentioned about the darkness aspect and, of course, speaking to the war in Europe and what appears to be a European peace process to diplomatically resolved the Ukraine-Russia war. Some quarters term it as an aggression and attack on the sovereignty of Ukraine. In Moscow and to Vladimir Putin and many Russians, it's a special military operation. We'll be coming to that. But, Prof, how important is this role for Kenya then, and a process that is led by a former president in terms of the face value in further deepening its interests?
It's very healthy. The growing relations between the two men, the former president and the current president. The fact that the current president has entrusted that important mission to the former president is very good. And the fact that the former president has accepted the assignment is also very good. I say this in the context that before the election, we know they're not having very good relations as people. You had the former president campaigning actively against the present president. So, and if their personal relations are soured, one can understand, But I think they have risen above that, which is a very important thing. They say, yes, we quarreled, we were on the wrong, but now the national interest take precedent. And the national interest in terms of the regional conflict and peace, because it is in Kenya's interest that there is stability in the region.
Okay.
Whether it is in Somalia, Uganda, South Sudan, Rwanda and Burundi, and Eastern Congo, which looks as if it's a different country from Congo. But so the bringing them together, and since now Congo is part of East African community, although it is on the Atlantic, so we say, okay, how do we ensure that there is order and stability in the region for the general benefits of everyone? Because once we have stability, the market grows.
Okay.
And when the market grows, we can deal with each other more effectively. We become richer as a region. So as long as there is war, conflict, and whatever it is, the region becomes underdeveloped. So the conflicts that we have are organs of underdevelopment in the region, and we need to get rid of them so that we can move forward.
All right. Daktari, before we get to the situation on the ground, just to understand what could be happening in the Eastern DRC, what could be happening in countries such as Ethiopia, an important question perhaps would be, why should Kenya care? Why should we be involved in what is happening around us?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And the first place to go is first to tell our people, our Kenyan public, because they tend to say a lot of nasty things from time to time on social media, you know this, that a country cannot run away from its international responsibilities. Because without a stable region, we cannot stabilize our economy, we cannot actualize our Vision 2030, which is also ingrained within our Africa Agenda 2063 outlook. And Kenya is part and parcel of the Africa Peace and Security Architecture, which is ingrained within the outlook of Africa Union and our region organizations. Most important, our sub-region organization here, the East African Community, like Professor Munene is saying. So there's something we call systems logic. Kenya is part of a system, a broader system. We have the international system, we have our regional system. And when one part of our system is not functioning, then the rest of the system is affected. And therefore, it becomes very important to be part of the peace, the recipe for peace, for regional peace and stability, so that we actualize what we call something we call the Kantian logic.
Okay.
What makes a region to be stable, or what stands for peace? That scholar was called Immanuel Kant, used to say, you need democracy, you need trade, and you need institutions to enable those democracies to continue with their trade.
Right.
And that logic is what is guiding countries, because beyond the fact that the country, your own country, is the place for last resort for your security and survival, in an international system where we feel that it's everyone for himself, but at the same time, you need to manage that state of the idea that there's not a global policeman out there, by making sure you come together, like our countries have come together in East African community. Now we have 7 members, and we are hoping even Somalia will come and join a East African community.
All right.
In Ethiopia and that kind of thing, because now we have a market of over 550 million people in this region. And with the task that President Uhuru is holding, and you know his kind of charm and good diplomatic demeanor, it's going to do good for our region, because with stable markets, remember the Africa Free Continental Trade Area arrangement is going to grow our region. In fact, if we can let that work, of course, there's give and take. Cooperation is about give and take. If it stabilizes well and people break even, Africa GDP on its own will grow by over 40%.
Okay, so
just imagine that.
So there's the tying of stability and economic growth here.
Of course. So economic stability, political stability, and regional stability is going to, of course, lead to economic growth, and pull out our region from the underdevelopment that Professor here is talking about.
Prof, how strategic was President Uhuru Kenyatta and the previous government, number one, in the admission, not only admission, but also the support it accorded the Democratic Republic of the Congo to be admitted as a member, and how President Kenyatta then was very vocal, supportive, and offered the springboard needed. And what signal did President Uhuru Kenyatta send when he was more or less the only head of state who attended President Tshisekedi's inauguration, coming against the backdrop of political crisis in the DRC, which was resolved by the Catholic Church after the stalemate with the previous administration that was led by President Joseph Kabila? Was Kenya so focused, so instrumental, and how strategic was the government's decision in supporting the DRC?
I think it was critical, and I think we should give President Uhuru some credit for having some foresight in that regard. The thinking being that creating a big regional market, and the reality was and still is that trade for Eastern Congo takes place through Mombasa. So they export and import not so much from the Atlantic side, but from the eastern, the Indian Ocean side. So Mombasa is critical to DRC. And if it is critical to DRC, it's also critical to Kenya, because we need that trade. And so the foresightedness of the president in trying to actualize this reality and make it firmware, that it is not simply that we are just doing business. We need to acknowledge the reality of it in a political way. And enhancing the East African community was a big task. So when he went there alone, no other president showed up to give moral support to Tshisekedi and say, look, we are with you, brother. Once having said, then, of course, it makes Tshisekedi very happy inside. And so, therefore, willing to discuss things. Because he did not just go there to say hi for inauguration. He went to talk things. The Kenyans are also known right now to be running to Congo for what?
Business.
For business, to invest to trade, and that kind of activity needs to be enhanced and be given some recognition. And with the Congo being inside the East African community, it benefits, and we also benefit from that relationship as members of the same community, East African community. So credit goes to President Uhuru for being that far-sighted. One, convincing Tshisekedi that Congo should be part of East Africa, formally. And then convincing his colleagues that it's a good idea, they should agree. So convince Museveni, convince Samia, convince Kagame, and the Burundi friend, and the Savaki, and convince all of them that it makes sense. Geographically, you can raise questions, but geopolitically, it makes a lot of sense. So we give him credit for that, and for the region for having accepted it. And now what that adds is that whatever happens in Congo is not just a Congolese thing. It's an East African thing. That is why there was that decision recently for East Africa to send peacekeeping forces and help to stabilize, to create stability. Because Kenya went there not as Kenya, but as part of the East African what? Contingency. Yeah. And each contributing what it can. Kenya led the way. In fact, the Keboshi, the CDF here, is the chairman of the group. Which means the strategy is being adopted and the way to do things. Kenya has a lot of input in that. Therefore, as far as Kenya is concerned, the success in that place will be a regional success. And a Kenyan success.
All right. Talking of which, the pivotal role that Kenya has played, there is an upcoming meeting, the Nairobi Peace Process. This, I understand, will be a very major meeting happening towards the end of this month. And ahead of that, the former President Uhuru Kenyatta, and we just want to hear what he said, recently just toured the Democratic Republic of Congo, just to sort of hold consultations with key stakeholders in that country ahead of this major meeting. And he spoke very passionately about the role that different countries are playing in ensuring that the DRC attains peace and stability. Let's just listen into what the former head of state had to say during his trip in Kinshasa.
We have not come here with any particular mindset to dictate what should happen, but rather in the spirit of our understanding and the mandate that has been given to us. We came here to listen to the people of the Congo, and we're looking forward, and the message that we have today is that all groups who currently bear arms should lay those arms down and choose the path of peace through dialogue, because there is nothing that can be gained through the barrel of a gun.
All right, Dr. Nzau, you've had the former head of state there talking about we have not come here to dictate what should happen.
That's right.
How do you understand these words, and why is this pivotal in a mediation process for a country to allow another country to find their own solutions? Where do you think this is coming from the former head of state?
Yeah, it really dovetails well into the decision itself, but that the current head of state took to task him with that, because the Congo theater is delicate, and it really needs people who are very impartial and very warm and very acceptable to because DRC Congo and that eastern part, North Kivu and those places, it's part of a long history of problems from within, and also some sub-regional issues. Right from independence in 1960, it was in the midst of Cold War, There was a Cold War issue there. You remember the former prime minister there who was killed, Patrice Lumumba, and such issues, assassinated. And then later, there was, in fact, one of the earliest United Nations missions was in the Congo. 1960 through 61 through 65, when now the government of President Mobutu Sese Seko took over. And then now, with the end of the Cold War, there was a vacuum and other issues, and then all these rebel groups. And these rebel groups, in fact, the PS, Foreign Affairs, that time, Macharia, was saying that there are over 46 of them. And there are many. Of course, there's this one you call M23, M23. There is FLDR, which one operates, these ones are rebels also, targeting to destroy, Rwanda and former genocidaires and bad things down there. There's another one called RED, from which also is a rebel group affecting Burundi. Then you have assorted militias there. What we call armed non-state groups. Mai. And you have all manner of Mai there. You have Mai Anganga, Mai Kutumba. Dangerous groups. Then there is what is called ADF, Allied Democratic Forces, which is against Uganda. And it is now, because of what happened in the Middle East with the defeat of Al-Qaeda and ISIS, what we call Daesh, Dawla Islamiyya fi al-Iraq wa al-Sham. These groups have now morphed into smaller cells, and they have come to Africa. And that is why you're seeing what is happening in Western Africa, up north in Somalia and these places. And now a group there that is allied to ADF, that is an Islamist terror group. Right. It's called City of Monotheism and Holy Warriors, which it translates into Medina Tawhid wa Mujahideen.
That's in Arabic?
Yes, in Arabic. Medina Tawhid wa Mujahideen. And it sounds like a good name, but those are bad people. They have caused, they were responsible for the attacks that took place in Kampala last year. And of course, regional security agencies are aware that they are being used by groups like ISIS, Al-Qaeda, to harm and cause the kind of things like we saw just a few weeks ago in Mogadishu, where 100 people died. So the Congo theater is complex, and it needs a very impartial mediator. Because if you take sides, and you're not impartial and you're not a good leader, you're not able to leverage. Because what is needed to make peace to hold is about to ensure that people communicate, there's confidence building, and the people can buy in and not renege on the commitments they make. And so far, it's working out well. Very good working relations now between Uganda and Rwanda. Burundi has also brought in the buy-in. And it's not Kenya just for Kenya's sake. It is Kenya being given that task of being very impartial, a good regional leader, and someone who can make the other people to feel comfortable with their presence there.
Thank you.
And so that contingent now led by General Nyaga, that we have there is going to really do a good job to ensure that first hostilities cease, and that food and goods, trade, services, capital can change, and that is good for peace.
Thank you, Dr. Nzomo. Quite good insights there. And Prof, earlier on you mentioned, and when we get back from the break, I'll pursue on that matter because of clarity purposes. And the biggest UN mission, I understand, is in the Democratic Republic of the Congo under MONUSCO. And then you have the deployment of a regional force. As to whether this is likely to play the style of the ECOWAS regional force in West Africa that at some point had signaled President Yahya Jammeh that if you won't leave power and hand it over to President Adama Barrow, then we'll be in. That, however, was preceded by talks led by Nigerians and, of course, leaders from the West African part of the continent as to how this is likely to pan out for the African continent, and then look at the Ethiopia peace talks that President Kenyatta still had midwifed in South Africa and here in Kenya.
Indeed, and that will be coming shortly after the break. Remember, we are discussing a lot right here in studio and also tracking a developing story for you that we will be giving you more details as soon as we receive it concerning the 7-story building that was under construction that collapsed yesterday afternoon at Seasons area in Kasarani, Nairobi. So that is also something to look forward to as we continue with the day's broadcast. But for now, we take a short break.